So, glad to see everyone this morning. Lent started, right? So, it's a good time to invite neighbors, friends, spouses if you have them. Some folks like to, do something extra special for Lent. So getting up early on Friday morning and coming to listen to us talk about the Bible, that should be penance enough for someone. Pleasurable penance, right? So since this is not only the first Friday of Lent, but also the first Friday of the month, at Masses we will have exposition of the Blessed Sacrament and so on. Special prayer for us to begin with. This is from Pope Francis, but you might say it's the Beatitudes according to Pope Francis. So in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Blessed are those who remain faithful while enduring evils inflicted on them by others, and forgive them from their heart. Blessed are those who look into the eyes of the abandoned and marginalized and show them their closeness. Blessed are those who see God in every person and strive to make others also discover Him. Blessed are those who protect and care for our common home. Blessed are those who renounce their own comfort in order to help others. Blessed are those who pray and work for full communion between Christians. And all these are messengers of God's mercy and tenderness. And surely they will receive from Him their merited reward. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so if you've paid attention to any of the Holy Father's encyclicals and so on, you'll see those themes all over the place. And it'll connect also with the scripture readings we have for daily Mass and with our wrap-up of the Book of Tobit today. Where do you get a copy of it? I'm reading that from Give Us This Day, the daily prayer for today's Catholics, published by the Liturgical Press. You have it? Well, look at the beginning. What page? I thought I told you, when you're talking about Bible, don't ask what page. Oh, that's perfect. Yeah. So if those of you who have subscription to Give Us This Day, it's on page 11, along with some other Lenten prayer. So last week we had a snowstorm. A number of people found themselves stuck in snowbanks, so you couldn't make it. But I'm glad to see all of you here, and a couple of our Lenten guests. So we're wrapping up the story of Tobiah in the journey he was sent on by his dad Tobit. For those of you who were here last week, we ended up with more of a question and answer Q&A. Some of this stuff we hit on last week in our Q&A, but we want to do a more thorough coverage here this morning. And I got a couple other little things, but one of the things about this book, we describe that it's not really a history book, and it's not really a wisdom book. It's kind of in between those biblical categories. But if we compare it to the kind of literature that we are used to, it's kind of like a historical novel, wasn't it? So far. But if you notice, there's a lot of wonderful themes running through, but it has a lot of instruction. You know, the main character, some of the secondary characters are always giving instruction. Tobit gives instruction to his son before leaving. Raphael, the guiding angel, gives instruction, you know, before marriage and after, and so on. When Tobit and now his wife Sarah are about to leave after, just think, celebrating a wedding for 14 days. I mean, you know, let's face it, you know, a lot of people, they get married, they celebrate the wedding, and they go on a honeymoon for 7 days or 14 days. Here, a double week of celebration. So, like Sarah's, you know, Sarah's dad, Raguel, he must have been a pretty rich man. He must have been pretty rich, huh? So, but looking at the tail end of chapter 10, just before they depart from Raguel and his wife Edna, they get instruction. And I want to focus, because it's one of the unique things about this book, particularly coming out of the milieu of the Jewish religion, probably about 200 years before Christ, is the focus on the women. I mean, women are given a fairly prominent position, insightful position, instructing, encouraging, and you know, with motherly hearts, you know, just aching over their children, huh? And so let's, just before they depart, chapter 10, look at verse 13. It's Edna now, Tobiah's mother-in-law, Sarah's mother, who says before they depart from Ecbatana, my child and beloved kinsman, Edna says, mother-in-law says, may the Lord bring you back safely, and may I live long enough to see children of you and my daughter Sarah before I die. Before the Lord, I entrust my daughter to your care. Never cause her grief at any time in your life. Go in peace, my child. From now on, I am your mother, and Sarah is your beloved. May all of us be prosperous all the days of our lives. And she kissed them both and sent them away in peace. It's significant that, you know, not only is this a very, motherly farewell, and not only to Tobiah, but also to her daughter, who she may or may not see ever again, huh? But it's entrusting them to God's care. So it's an indication of also the spirituality, the piety, the religiosity, if you will, of the women of that day, passing it on. Tobit's response, verse 14, and when Tobiah left Raguel, he was full of happiness and joy, and he blessed the Lord of heaven and earth, the King of all, for making his journey so successful. And finally he said goodbye to Raguel and his wife Edna, and added, may I honor you all the days of my life. So here again, the narrator of this story gives Edna like equal footing with her husband Raguel. Very unusual. And so they set off because Tobiah has to return home. He's not finished with what he set out to do. And, you know, let's not forget what the real purpose of the journey was. What was the real purpose of the journey? To bring back money that Tobit had entrusted to a relative in the land of the Medes, and to bring it back to Nineveh. And so, starting out chapter 11, they left. They began their return journey. When they were near, just before Nineveh, Raphael said, "You know how we left your father. Let us hurry on ahead of your wife and prepare the house, while the rest of the party are still on the way." And so they both went on ahead, and Raphael said to Tobiah, "Have the ball in your hand." And the dog ran along behind it. There's that dog again. When they began the journey, the dog followed them. And now they're coming back home, and the dog's still there. Now, aren't you curious about that?
Loyal dog.
Mm-hmm.
Loyal dog? I tried to search, where else in the Bible are dogs mentioned? And usually, if dogs are mentioned in other places of the Bible, it's not too good. Yeah, they clean up the scraps of the battlefield. So you can just take the next logical step. The scraps of the battlefield. The bodies that were left behind. There's one or two passages that talk about dogs in connection with the flock, with the sheep. Okay, so there's not really a real good, biblical thing. Although in my research I found that in other ancient Near Eastern texts from the early Hebrew time period, oftentimes dogs are a part of folk tales, and they become like a theme, like a motif of survival. A motif of survival. And in other folk tales from the ancient Near East. And so that's one thing about this book, too. I've tried to point out as we've studied this the last couple of weeks, that there are elements from ancient folk tales and even characters or caricatures of folk elements, folk people, demons, the demon in the bedroom, from folk tales from the ancient Near East that have been merged into this story to add color, to add texture, to add a real interest to it. So the dog becomes another motif. Meanwhile, verse 5, meanwhile, this starts out, verse 5, Anna, Tobiah's mom, sat watching by the road for her son. And when she saw him come, she exclaimed to his father, "Tobit, your son is coming, and the man who traveled with him." Now, even before they get there, Raphael instructs him, don't forget, what you have to do. You still have that fish's gallbladder. When they started out on the trip, he stuck his feet in the Tigris River, and the fish went after his toes, and he grabbed the fish and had to cut it open and save the liver and the gallbladder and the heart. Well, the heart and the liver he used to chase away the demon from his wife's bedroom, so to speak, but he still had the gallbladder. When we first talked about that, didn't someone say they had to go to their eye doctor? Did you ask your eye doctor about that?
Yeah, right before the surgery about a week ago, I told Dr. Braybeck about this passage.
Yeah?
He didn't answer me. I was under by then.
Don't you have a follow-up?
Yeah. I'll get better glasses.
Well, you better remind him of the passage. You point it out to him,
might not be in his Bible,
well, that's true. If he's not Catholic, it wouldn't be in his Bible. Yeah. Is it? All right. So they come home. And, as soon as they come, Anna runs out, throws her arms around, and sobs loudly, welcoming her son. And Tobit got up, stumbling out of the. Remember, he's blind. Stumbling out of the gate. The courtyard gate. Isn't this really a well-written thing?
Yes, it is.
I mean, you can just picture in your mind, some of these things. And
excuse me, Father.
Yeah.
How far was the distance they traveled? Some said it was like 300 miles from where Tobit started to come home.
it's interesting that you should. I was anticipating a question like that, right, Gloria? So up here on the map of ancient Near East, Nineveh is here. On a modern-day map, Nineveh is just across the Tigris River from Mosul in northern Iraq. Okay? And so just across the Tigris. And then the other city where Raguel was is Akbatana. Akbatana. And that's here in, today would be almost central Iran. It was the land of the Medes.
It's BC before Christ.
It's BC, before Christ, right?
Before cards.
Oh, before cards, too. Yeah. Cliff said it's BC before cars. Cliff, he still has it every once in a while. So Nineveh and this place, about 250 to 275 miles as the crow flies. But yeah, there's a lot of hills in between and so on. But this doesn't draw out their return journey. It's very quick. All of a sudden, they're there.
Well, I guess the reason for my question is the story is so well developed, but it seems like it takes such short time. This could have taken years from the time they started till the time they came back.
Ancient people didn't.
They didn't measure years.
They didn't dwell on that sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah. It's the richness of the story and the significance of the prayers. But as soon as they get there, Tobiah performs angelic surgery, so to speak, on his dad. If you take a look at that, if you go see your eye doctor, you can tell him. So, verse 10, Tobit got up stumbling and went through the courtyard, and Tobiah went up to him with the fish gall in his hand. Now stop to think. This fishy organ must be at least a month or a month and a half old.
That's what I want to know.
No wonder the dog followed him.
He wanted to roll in it.
Yeah. So
It was.
he went up with the fish gall in his hand and holding him firmly, blew into his eyes. Courage, Father, he said. And next he smeared the medicine on his eyes, and it made them smart. I bet it did. And then, beginning at the corners of his eyes, Tobit used both hands to peel off the cataracts. So you point out to Dr. Brayback, it's cataract surgery, hand style. And when Tobit saw his son, he threw his arms around him and he wept and he exclaimed, "I can see you, son, the light of my day." And then he breaks into a prayer, giving blessing and praise and thanks to God and all his angels and so on. So it's kind of interesting.
You want me to sue you?
The rejoicing, but it's almost like this little completion of the angelic directed surgery, because several times Raphael, the angel that's his guide, has informed him how to do this. The thing that gets me is it says he used both hands to peel off the cataract, and I don't know. I guess I have a cartoonish vision. How can you get two hands over a cataract? I don't know. The only thing I can think of is Don. Stand up. I'm not going to hurt you. Stand up. Take your glasses off. The only thing I can think of is he's going like this, holding his father's head as he's, I don't know what hurt you. Pulling on it. That's the only thing that kind of makes sense to me. I don't know about you, but again, this is kind of a little detail that kind of adds texture to the story, right? But it just leads into the prayer, and that's the other thing. This book is filled with instruction, teaching, but also these prayers. Yeah.
I got hurt, and he stayed about a half hour, and a white skin began to come off of his eyes like the skin of an egg.
Okay, so the old translation, let me see that. That's pretty cool. This is the old Dewey Reed translation. Let me see it. He gives us even more detail. And then Tobias, taking the gall of the fish, anointed his father's eyes. And he stayed about a half an hour, and a white skin began to come out of his eyes, like the skin of an egg. And Tobias took hold of it and drew it from his eyes, and immediately he recovered his sight. So a lot more detail in the old translation. I don't know, maybe the eye doctors had influence on the modern translators and said, hey, just put it this way. I like that better. So thank you for that. So now, Sarah hasn't gotten there yet. So next, Tobias thanking and praising God, and he found out, and then Tobiah told his father that his journey had been a success. He had brought back the money, that he had married Raguel's daughter Sarah, who would arrive shortly. And then he breaks out in some more rejoicing and praising of God. And then he goes out, Tobit goes out to welcome his daughter-in-law. And verse 17, or before verse 17, halfway through verse 16, when the people of Nineveh saw him walking along briskly with no one leading him by the hand, they were amazed. Before them all, Tobit proclaimed how God had mercifully restored his sight. And then Tobit reached Sarah, the wife of his son Tobiah, and greeted her, welcome my daughter, and blessed be God. And so it's a welcoming of the daughter, the new daughter-in-law. A little further down, welcome to our home with blessing and joy. Come in, daughter. That day there was joy for all the Jews who lived in Nineveh. And Ahikar and his nephew Nadab also came to rejoice with Tobit. And they celebrated Tobiah's wedding feast for 7 happy days, and he received many gifts. So, did that kid luck out or what? In a foreign land, they celebrated his wedding for 7 days. 14 days, he comes back home, 7 more days of wedding, more gifts are thrown upon him and his young wife. Now, the introduction of this Ahikar and Nabad that we find mentioned here, now, you might have various translation or spellings of this name. I don't know, Don, if yours is different. New American Bible spells it Ahi with a Q. And Nabad. Now, these figures they're presented as if they're relatives of Tobiah. However, both of these are heroes of ancient Assyrian folklore. Heroes of ancient Assyrian folklore. And it's used as a literary device by the writer, again, to add importance to this story. All right? There's in ancient Assyrian folklore, Ahihar is saved from death because of his righteousness. So there's a real parallel between what Tobit did, burying the dead and so on in the middle of the night, and the folklore stories of this ancient folklore hero. It comes about again in the next session. That's important. Is starting with chapter 12 is the one bit of unfinished business is about Raphael's wages. You know, from the beginning, he said he'd be paid handsomely. But remember, he didn't identify himself as Raphael, did he? He identified himself with another name. And throughout this story, even though the story calls him Raphael, for in the people of the plot of the story, for Tobiah, they think he's that name that was at the beginning. I forget what it is. And he identified himself as a relative of these people. Well, you know, in a kind of a godly sense, yeah, he was. But they had to deal now. Tobit had promised him at the beginning of chapter 12, if he was successful, he'd even get a bonus. Now, but isn't that kind of ironic? Because look, remember earlier in the story, Tobit, after he went blind, his wife had to go out and get a side job. And remember, she got a bonus.
He brought the goat into the house.
Yeah.
To the desertion of his wife.
Yeah. She brought in a goat. And they got into a
discussion.
Yeah. A husband and wifely discussion. I don't know. I was never married, so I don't know what you call it. But, and then she ends up saying, well, the goat was a bonus because they liked my, and he said, take it back. You know, you're real short. Now, he's like talking with his son, what kind of bonus should we give, you know, this guy who was so successful? And chapter 12, verse 5, Tobiah called Raphael and said, take as your wages half of all that you have brought back and go in peace. So he's offering him. Now, I don't know if you caught it. There was just a line. When they left Raguel's house, they got tons of money and flocks and camels and male and female, servants and so on. I mean, they had a whole retinue. That's why Sarah was holding back a whole retinue of wealth and so on. And so he's willing to give this guy half. So Raphael, what does he do? He called the two men aside privately. And then thanks be to God, in the context of a prayer, he revealed something. Now, part of this is patterned also off of an ancient Near Eastern a folklore called the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead. Now, those of you who were fans of a band by that name realized, I don't know if they realized that, the name for that band actually came from an ancient Near Eastern mythological folklore. Okay? And in that folklore, the pattern is pretty much the same, and a heavenly guide or angelic guide is offered half of the loot of a treasury and then reveals his true identity and then disappears in the folkloric myth of the Grateful Dead. All right? So that's the same pattern that's used here for Raphael. And so he doesn't need the bonus because he disappears. Okay? And he reveals himself. Now, the exact identity starts with verse 11. And we have to take a little closer look at that. So, chapter 12, verse 11. I will now tell you the whole truth. I will conceal nothing at all from you, Raphael says. I have already said to you, a king's secret is prudent to keep, but the works of God are to be made known in due honor. I can now tell you that when you, Tobit, and Sarah prayed in their bedroom on their wedding night, it was I who presented and read the record of your prayer before God, before the glory of the Lord. And I did the same thing when you used to bury the dead. And when you did not hesitate to get up and leave your dinner. Remember, it was like a Passover dinner. In order to go and bury the dead, I was sent to put you to the test. At the same time, however, God commissioned me to heal you and your daughter-in-law, Sarah. I am Raphael, one of the 7 angels who entered and served before the glory of God. And stricken with fear, the 2 men fell to the ground. I am Raphael, one of the 7 angels. Now, the 7 angels, when you think of the archangels that are identified, angels that are identified in the scriptures, Old Testament, New Testament, there's only 3, right? And 2 of them are identified in the Old Testament and 1 in the New. Except in the book of Revelation. And in the book of Revelation, besides identifying Raphael, the healer, and Michael, the soldier, the destroyer, and Gabriel, the announcer, it does mention in the book of Revelations, chapter 8, verse 2, 7 angels. But it doesn't give any other names. Now, in some Old Testament apocryphal, remember we talked about Old Testament apocrypha? In some of those writings, it mentions 2 more angels, special angels, Uriel, and there's another one. Maybe it's in the footnotes. Or Uriah, or Uriel. There's a footnote here. Raphael is one of the 7 specially designated intercessors of men's prayers. The names of 2 other angels are given in the Bible. Gabriel and Michael, found in Jude. Okay, it doesn't give us the other 2.
Jeremiah, Uriel, and Jeremiel. Jamil and Uriel, right? Yes.
You found it. Huh? So, but so that gives us 5 names, but we don't have the other 2. Yes.
Is Satan one of the angels?
No.
A fallen angel?
Well, he's a fallen angel, but he's not part of the special.
He's not in the 7.
He's no longer God's friend.
Okay. I'm not confused.
Okay. Yeah.
There is another named angel, though.
No, we don't know what the other angels did. Okay, but they are mentioned. So that gives maybe a new spin for those of you who might have wondered how that restaurant down the street. You should add.
7 children.
Huh? You should ask them if it was tied to the Bible then. They had 7 children. Okay. So now this part, and so Raphael disappeared, and so the family is left with all the loot. Not only what they brought back from Raphael's family, but after 7 more days of wedding celebration, all the wedding gifts that they got, and it says that these 2 famous folkloric people also came and celebrated with them. And then most of chapter 13 is Tobit's joyful prayer to God.
Excuse me, Father?
Yes.
There's a line in there that I think is kind of interesting also, if you want to carry your theme that you were talking about earlier, where Raphael says he dined with them, but not really, and he will dine no more. The concept is does he go to heaven and starve and then come back to earth to dine again when he does something for someone else? But I think if you carry that there's some little embedded lines in here that are pretty interesting.
There is, because as he reveals all the times that he was present, and sometimes not present to them visually, or present to them, but more like a phantom.
Yep.
And they didn't understand or see. So, Raphael's prayer of praise of God is kind of recounts everything, and he puts it in the context of a very faithful heart. One of the things that is renewed here is in his prayer is many of the themes that have been found here. Now, one of the themes that are very important in here is almsgiving. And that is reinforced by some of these speeches as well as the prayers. And that kind of fits in with our Lenten themes, right? Prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. Huh? Prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. In the Book of Tobit, and actually to tell you the truth, this book and what they say about almsgiving forms like the biblical basis for our understanding of almsgiving and what Jesus says about almsgiving in the gospel that we read 2 days ago for Ash Wednesday from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 6, where Jesus talks about prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. Here, and also in the book of Sirach, and there's a number of passages in the book of Sirach, check out your cross-references, where almsgiving is mentioned. And almsgiving here from this biblical perspective it doesn't deal with money. It's not about money. The Old Testament motif of almsgiving deals with doing good deeds for others. doing good deeds for others. And that's kind of recaptured, if you read carefully, Tobit's prayer. And it should give us an insight into our Lenten practices as well. We, unfortunately, in our culture, we've kind of reduced almsgiving to just pull out some money and give people some money, which is okay. Mission collections or rice bowl collections or world poor collections. During Lent, we're going to have all those opportunities. But more importantly, from this biblical base, the Old Testament biblical base, and follow those readings in Sirach, and this whole story, almsgiving is connected with burying the dead, feeding the hungry. Okay?
Actually, it's works of kindness.
Or we also called it, we looked at it this summer. Yeah, corporal works of mercy. Basically, what we sum up as the corporal works of mercy in the Catholic tradition is almsgiving.
And feeding the dog who followed them all these miles.
And feeding the dog, yeah.
And Pope Francis says get the smell of sheep.
And Pope Francis says getting the smell of the sheep on you. Okay. Which can be taken in a lot of different ways. I'll just encourage you, for your prayer today, First Friday, read through his chapter 13.
It's beautiful.
It's a beautiful prayer.
It's like a psalm.
It's like a psalm. And Tom, I'm glad you pointed that out, because a lot of times in the commentaries on the Book of Tobit, it will indicate it's hymns and psalm-like things, and that's what this is a striking example of. Now, the epilogue, chapter 14. Okay, how does the story finish up? Well, it says, chapter 14, Tobit died peacefully at the age of 112 and received honorable burial in Nineveh. He was 62 years old when he lost his eyesight, and after he recovered it, he lived in prosperity, giving alms and continually blessing God and praising the divine majesty. Before he died, he called his son Tobiah and Tobiah's 7 sons. He and Sarah had 7 sons. Were they blessed by God?
Yes.
Magical number, huh? Perfect number. 7 sons. Doesn't say how many daughters. That's right. So. Hey, there's a lot of parallelism in this book. So, how many grooms got killed off before? 7. And then Sarah ends up with the right man and ends up with
7 sons. 7 sons.
They're replaced. Okay. And so it talks about all kinds of things. We fast forward down to verse 9. Now, children, Tobiah is still speaking before he dies. I give you this command. Serve God faithfully. Do what is right before him. You must tell your children to do what is upright and to give alms. Remember, alms is what we put up on the board. To be mindful of God and at all times to bless his name sincerely and with all your strength. Now as for you, my son, depart from Nineveh. Do not remain here. The day you bury your mother next to me, do not even stay overnight within the confines of the city. For I see that people here shamelessly commit all signs of wickedness and treachery. Think, my son, of all that Nadab did to Anakar, the very one who brought him up. Anakar went down alive, and so this gives a next kind of a summary of that folk tale with Anakar. And so, my children, verse 11, note well what almsgiving does, and also what wickedness does. It kills. But now my spirit is about to leave me. So they placed him on his bed, and he died. And after receiving an honorable, burial, Tobiah's mother died. She was buried next to the father. And they departed with his wife and children for Midian, where he settled in Akbatana, with his father-in-law Raguel, and he took respectful care of his aging father-in-law and mother-in-law, and he buried them in Akbatana in Midian, and then he inherited Raguel's estate as well as that of his father. So he took care of all the family business. And he did all that his father wanted, following the instructions. And if you look also at the and there's a lot of sections of instructions here, right, to the young man, as well as prayers of praise and thanks. He was thankful before he left his mother-in-law and father-in-law. But it's almost like he's rewarded with prosperity and long life. But long life in order to finish what was his purpose as son in both families. So, yes.
We just noticed something in the New American Bible.
Yeah.
In chapter 14, the verse goes 7, 9, and 8 as far as the numeric order. Is there a reason for that?
7, 9, then 8.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He said that they notice in the New American Bible the numbering of the verses goes 7 in chapter 14 is part of this prayer of Tobiah. 7, then it jumps to 9, and then it goes back to 8. It was probably an editor's judgment in order to make the narrative flow. Because if you look, verse 8, now as far as you, my son, depart from them, do not remain here. Verse 8, followed by verse 10, and the day you bury your mother next to me, and so on. So that verse 8 connects the narrative better in terms of the story, the plot line, rather than try to read it putting verse 8 after verse 7 followed by verse 9. It doesn't seem to flow. It breaks up the prayer of Tobit. Yeah. So that's probably why the editors did it that way. And of course, the other thing, realize that, in the original text, there was no chapters and verses.
No, there was not.
Okay? There was no chapters and verses.
And it's what piece of manuscript they picked up later that when they revised and rewrote the Bible, they added the differences to make continuity.
Sometimes there was additions and so on. It depends. The sources that they used to, for this particular translation. Incidentally, talking about the sources, when we go back, you can read this if you have a New American Bible. In the introduction to the New American Bible, I think you'll find this. They say that this was written about 200 BC. The author of this is not given. As we looked at it, you can realize they have drawn from folkloric stories from several ancient Near Eastern cultures, folkloric stories from several Near Eastern cultures. The historical setting for this story is evidently during the Assyrian Empire, which was the 8th century BC. But that's just a historical setting, okay, for this. There's nothing else to really pin it down historically. So that's just a narrative context. Now, the oldest copies of this had come down to us in Greek. And even it's understood that St. Jerome, when he translated the Bible into Latin and the Book of Tobit, he kind of did it real quick, but he had Greek translations. Until the discoveries of the Dead Sea Scrolls. They found a portion of the Book of Tobit in one of the caves when they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls between 1947 and 1955. And that was in Aramaic and Hebrew. And so the scholars think that this originally came down in Aramaic, which means it must have come through a Jewish community cultural center that's actually spoke Aramaic and used Aramaic. So that's kind of interesting. And the new Jerusalem Bible, because the scholars and editors of the Jerusalem Bible were the first scholars to get their hands on the Dead Sea Scrolls. So if you look at the prayers of the Book of Tobit in the New Jerusalem Bible, that translation of the Bible, you may get the best translation from the earliest text that they had discovered. Just a little textual background for you. Yeah. 2 points.
In the narrative, I think it's in 12 into 13, Raphael, one of them talks about the destruction of Jerusalem. And the question is, how many times was Jerusalem destroyed before the Romans destroyed the temple in the 70s? Or is that the author looking forward and writing backward?
Well, Jerusalem was destroyed, of course, and the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians.
Right.
And so there's elements in here that also kind of reflect the influence of the Babylonian culture and subsequently the Persian culture on Judaism. What is the example of the influence of Babylonian and Jerusalem culture? The whole thing about the king at the beginning warning Tobit and the Jewish people not to bury the dead. That was also like an edict of Nebuchadnezzar. Secondly, what influence from the Persian culture? Persians took over the Babylonians, okay? And Persians were Cyrus and Artaxerxes and so on were important and had influence. But the religion of Persia in the 6th century BC is a religion that continues yet today. It's one of the oldest religions, Zoroastrianism. Yeah. And it's through Zoroastrianism and the Persian culture that what entered into Judaism was angelology. Angelology. Study of angels and characteristics of angels. Earlier, when angels are mentioned, they are simply as messengers of God. Here, the role that Raphael plays, and we talked about this last week, it's much more than just a messenger from God, isn't it? When I went through it, he was a guide, he was a protector, he was an instructor, he was a mediator, he was a mentor, he was a testor. right? And so it's a fuller job description, if you will, or role description that this particular angel messenger of God played in this particular story. And that's an indication of the influence of the Persian culture on Judaism at a time period post-exilic. Yes?
My Bible's notes say, Tobit then represents a Judaism that sees angels and demons as having important roles to play in the drama between God and human beings. This contrasts sharply with books such as Judith and Esther, where human beings are in control of their own destiny without any intervention of angelic and demonic powers. The author of Tobit considers angels to be more than simply God's messengers. They mediate prayers in God's throne room. They oppose demons. They commission the writing of books. Belief in demons accompanies a belief in angels. While angels make their interventions for the good of people, demons are hostile powers.
It's almost like the priest read that beforehand, right? Huh? Thank you very much. That's much more than we had than what I said, but that's a good commentary. I want to just.
Father, did
Yeah.
Zoroastrianism then have just one God? Was that model?
Did Zoroastrianism have only one God? No, they had demigods, and one was good and one was bad. Yeah.
One real quick point. I just read this last night, that the papyrus that much of this was written on they would scrape the papyrus to take the ink off to rewrite. And now with electronic means, they're able to go into the papyrus and read what was truly there. And they're starting to look centuries back at what was actually written versus what is on papyrus that they have found. It's pretty interesting that we're learning more and more about past history or ancient history.
Yeah. Yeah. They recycle the paper product. Well, really, the famous last words to this whole thing is what Tobit says to Tobiah before he dies. Now, children, and it can be summed up like this. Now, children, serve God faithfully until death. Have a blessed Lent, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. We're going to look at Judith next week. So, and